Hey everyone, this is Matt with Learn Everything About Design, and in this video we're going to carry on building our fender flare for my 1984 Mitsubishi Starion. Now at this point we've been doing this fender flare design for about an hour and a half, and as I mentioned in the last video, it does take a bit of time to make these kinds of designs. Anytime you're actually going to produce something, you want to spend a little extra time making sure all the small details are right. And as I mentioned in the last video, I could spend even more time trying to tweak and adjust this, but it's really not helpful unless you're making a fender flare for my car. So we're going to continue to go on, and any place where we might see some improvements or room for improvement, I'm going to mention those, but I'm going to try not to get too hung up on those different areas. So what we want to do at this point, if you're following along, make sure that you use your own data set, but you can also go to the description of the video and download what you see on the screen. We have an original copy of the fender that we made, the fender shape. We've got the wheel arch piece, and then the new copy of it, and then we've got the mesh in here, of course. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to continue to work with the mesh hidden because it's only going to just eat up our resources, and that's why we have this original copy of the fender that's relatively close. Now I do urge you to work in box display, which is Alt and 1 on the keyboard. Since we do have multiple bodies, you will need to select each body and determine if it's going to be box display or smooth display. You can also do that from utilities under display mode. So the next thing that we want to do is we want to carry on building out the shape, and it's important that we understand one problem that's going to be coming our way, and that's going to be a star point. Now, in general, we like to keep four-sided patches or faces whenever possible. However, because we're changing directions, we're going from this fairly boxy shape into this wheel arch, we're going to end up with these star points that are going to have 5 edges coming into one specific vertex. This is going to be something that is going to plague your designs and forms for the rest of your time using it. So it's something that we really need to make sure that we identify and we work around the limitations that we have. So to get started, I want to continue to carry on this shape, noting that we are going to end up with a star point at one of these two locations. There are a couple different ways that we can do this. We can begin building new faces and connect them to what we have here. We can extrude what we have, or we can, again, just kind of work with the tools that we have in our tool bag. So things like bridge, which will allow us to make some selections, and then it'll create the geometry in between it. For me personally, I like to work essentially face by face. I like to begin to build out the shape one face at a time. So I'm actually going to start from these two edges. I'm going to select those and go to Modify, Edit Form. And from my right-hand view, I'm going to hold down the Alt key and begin extruding these up until it looks like it's roughly aligning to that fender there. And I'm just going to leave it how it is. I'm going to go back to my right view. I'm going to hold down Alt again, and I'm going to extrude this one up as well. What I'm looking to do, because eventually we're going to combine these two bodies together, is I want to think about the edges that are underneath where I'm working here. So for example, this edge right here runs down to about where that vertex is, but you can see that our new edges are sort of going up into the side. So what I want to do is, before I get any further, I'm going to use Insert Point, and I want to bring this up to the edge, then double click these and hit Delete to get rid of them. So again, I'm working on sort of adjusting the shape as I go. Next, I'm going to go to Modify and Weld Vertices, and when we do weld vertices, the first one we pick is going to move to the location of the second one. So that's important because we don't want to adjust the shape of the wheel arch. We only want to move the new portion of the fender that we're building. So here you can see that we're now building out that shape. Quick check and smooth display. We're going to say OK here. We're going to select the form body. Now, sometimes you might notice that it won't convert it to a smooth display. In some cases, it won't do that because there's geometry problems with it. In this case, it will allow us to go to that smooth display. You can use Control and 4 on the screen to hide the edges. Now, this is a fairly smooth flare at this time. We're going to add some more detail to it, but for right now, it's fairly smooth, and that's okay. So we're going to go back to Box Display and bring my edges back. Control 6 to bring the edges back. You can also go down to your display settings and visual style and see what the shortcut keys are here. So now this is the point where we're likely going to end up with that star point. And I'm going to do this by extruding some of these edges here. So again, Modify, Edit Form, going to use Alt and bring these to the side. So let's go ahead and make sure that we pull it out to be about where that edge is. Remember that when we use weld vertices, it's going to pull that down automatically. We'll let go of Alt and do this one more time. I'm going to bring this down here. Let go of Alt and do it one more time. And what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to follow the upper edge because the width is going to be consistent and not worry so much about these bottom edges. So next, I want to make sure that those new edges are sort of falling in line where they should be. So I'm going to go to a top view. And I'm going to pull these entire faces in. And I'm just going to bring them in this way a little bit. And then I'm going to do this one as well. And at some point, I'm going to just take the individual edges and get them relatively close. It's always good to sort of work at the larger scale whenever possible. And what I mean by that is selecting multiple edges and moving an entire edge or scaling an entire edge. And then you can go back and make adjustments and do fine tuning with individual vertices when you need to. But for the most part, you want to avoid doing that at the start. You want to make sure that you spend the time and sort of work with what you have at the very top level, the very broad level. So selecting entire edge, selecting an entire group of faces or an entire body. So now at this point, I'm not going to worry about moving the stuff down here because I'm going to be using weld vertices. So I'm going to take this vertex here and move it to this one. I'm going to take this one and move it here. And I'm going to take this one and move it here. So again, keeping the poly count or the number of face counts low means that I only need to worry about the stuff that's up here, and the rest of it can just be pulled in. Once again, I like to do a quick check on smooth just to make sure there are no inherent problems. I'm going to do Control and 4 to get rid of my edges. And this is where that star point is going to reside. And right now, we don't see a problem with it because the number of faces that we have in this model are relatively low. But one thing that you will start to notice when you have these star points in your design is that at those edges, there's going to be more tension in your surfaces. It's going to start to pull that geometry in. Now, when this happens sort of organically, when the design ends up having these star points in them, it could be 5 edges, it could be 3 edges, it could be more, but really anything that's not 4 edges coming together. As soon as you have those, you're going to begin having problems controlling the edge continuity around those areas. So what I try to do is I try to push them into areas where we have a larger flat section. We don't have a lot of change in curvature. So it being near this edge here is going to be problematic. We're not going to fix it right now, but I am going to give you just a quick tip on how I would go about fixing it. So I'm going to use Modify, Insert Edge, and I'm going to put an edge that's in the roughly the middle of that face. And what this is going to do is it's going to push that star point away from the curvature. And I'm going to go back to Box Display to take a look at this. I'm going to double click this edge, and you can see when I double click it, it stops at the star point. This edge down here will run all the way from end to end because the continuity is there, the tangency on that edge is there. However, when we run into a star point, it ends up stopping the progress here. So again, this is going to be problematic for us once we start to add a lot of detail. But inserting an edge allows us to move the curvature slightly away from that star point. Now remember, we don't want anything that's completely flat, so generally I will move these edges, even if it's just very slightly, move it out. And what this will do is this will allow me to just manipulate where that star point is going to be interfering with my design. Another thing that we can do is we can take a look at our curvature map analysis. And in some instances, as we start to manipulate this, we can see what's happening here with this red edge. So that we don't really have anything driving the curvature back here yet, so we have to kind of avoid that. But you can see the red edge where the curvature is the highest sort of dips away where that star point is, and then it comes back out. And that's something that you will likely see when you're talking about shadows and reflections. So this is why we want to work around the star points. And while I have this curvature map analysis on, I'm going to go ahead and leave it on for this body. I'm going to double click the edge that we just inserted, and then I'm going to delete it so we can see the change in this. So we're going to select it and just hit delete. And once again, you can see that now what's happening as we get closer to that star point, the green means that that section is flatter than the areas that are red, yellow, or orange. So this tells me that I'm not able to accurately control the curvature in this area. There are other problems that are going to pop up, but for right now, that's the main one that we want to just make sure that we're aware of. So we're going to go back into box display and continue working with this, knowing that we'll likely want to readdress this a little bit later. So the next thing that I want to do is I want to make sure the overall shape that I have here is what I'm looking for. I want to make sure that at each step in the process, I take the time to manipulate the geometry how I want it, because the more faces we end up adding, the harder it's going to be. So right now, you can see that this sort of tucks in. When we go from the front here, it sort of tucks in, flares out as we get close to the fender, and everything from the top looks okay. If I look at it from the front, I want to envision this being my flare. So when I look at it from the front, I want this to taper in a little bit more, because that's what the front of the fender is doing. So the way that I'm going to do this is I'm going to make sure I leave these edges alone. I probably do want to do some tweaking and just moving these things around so they're a little bit closer to the form body underneath. But what I want to do is I want to taper this in. Now we can do this by moving the entire edge. And once we move the entire edge, I then want to take just the front vertice and start pulling it in closer to the rest of the design, and then make my adjustments from here. Oftentimes you'll find again that you will need to use the in-plane movement, because the directional ones will have a snap value based on how far away you're viewing it. So here it's plus or minus 1 millimeter. As I scoot back just a little bit, it's going to go to 5, even further it's going to go to 10 and 25 and so on. So you will need to make some adjustments here, but in general, what you're looking for is you want to see the transitions between these edges. It's going to represent the way that the design is going to look like in the smooth display. When we look at the second visualization option, which allows us to see the control cage and the smooth display underneath it, this can help you understand what's happening with these edges. So the tangency at the top edge, it's going to be driven by this cage. And then the tangency at the next edge is driving the other side of that surface. Because we don't have a lot of edges in this design, that's why it's very sort of curved and flat at this same time. So it's got some curvature here, but then it's very flat in the rest of the areas because we have such large faces. But once we start to add the detail, we're going to start breaking these up a bit more. So that's a good starting point for the front. I want to make some other minor adjustments by just moving these edges down and making some adjustments. I want this edge to come a little bit closer to the edge underneath, and this one here, and this one here. Eventually what I'm going to do is I'm going to be deleting some of the fender underneath and then merging them together. So that's why I want to spend the time to get this right. So I'm going to bring this one down so it's almost horizontal. And I probably want to bring this one down as well so it looks to be fairly horizontal. It doesn't have to be perfect. Again, on a design for myself, I might spend 30 or 40 hours, where really we're going to go through this in about 2 or 3. So there is definitely diminishing returns once you spend more time on it. But again, you can really sit here and tweak these values quite a bit before you get a good result. So the next thing that we want to do is we want to continue to build this back section. We're going to do it the same way we did the front. I'm going to take this edge, hold down Alt, I'm going to extrude it up. Noting that we have an extra division here that we're going to have to deal with in a little bit. I'm going to hold down Alt again, bring this up, and I'm going to do it 2 more times and bring it up here. Now I'm going to make some manual adjustments here. So I'm going to bring this top point down. I'm going to bring this one back. And again, this is another reason why we spent the time to make that form underneath that was roughly matching the fender, because now we have these references where these vertices can go to sort of manipulate the curvature underneath. Now, I can already tell you that this is going to be a problem because we need to add another edge here, but for right now, we're not going to worry about it, and we're going to add it later. So what I mean by that is the geometry is not really lining up perfectly because the fender underneath has 2 faces here and we've just got the one. But I do want to make sure I do the same thing, adjust this. Now that I know that it's okay from the side, I'm going to bring this vertice until I get it relatively close. I'm going to do the same thing here. Now these ones I want to be relatively close because that's what we're going to attach to the OEM fender, or the shape that we created. The stuff back here, this is going to represent how wide we want the flare to be. So we don't have to have it perfect, but we do want to at least look at the shapes and make sure that we're in the right ballpark. So I can see from here that I probably want to take this in a little bit. We want to flare it back just a hair. And probably this edge here. And then rotate it around and just take a look at the design. So you can kind of see that we're matching the shape a little bit underneath. If we want it to be a little bit more drastic, we can pull that back. And it's going to give us an overall shape that we're looking for. All right, we've almost connected these together, so let's go ahead and do just a little bit more work and connect them. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to explore the bridge tool to see if that helps us out at all. Now, in general, I don't really use the bridge tool for this kind of work. There are other things that we can do. So for example, if you want to make a new face, you can snap the new face to these points here, and that sometimes can be a bit quicker, especially if you've already done the work to build out the outside of this. That's a good way for us to build the rest of the geometry without having to extrude it. At some point, you are going to have to extrude edges, but at this point, it can help us, allow us to build out those faces by just snapping to what's there. Now, here's the part where we really need to think about the way that the form is broken up. So as I mentioned, we probably need to add another edge, because right now we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 openings, or 6 edges that we need to connect together. Now this one is going to merge to this one, which will help, but then we still need to close off that area. So the first thing that I want to do is I want to get this edge a little bit closer to where it should be. So modify, slide, and I'm going to pull it down. And then I want to use modify and weld vertices. So we'll take this one and move it there and say okay. Next, we can patch this area, which is going to be 4-sided, but it is going to be problematic. But I'm going to use fill hole, and I'm going to say okay. The next thing that I want to do is I want to add a couple of additional edges. So we're going to use insert point. I'm going to come from here, and I'm just going to, actually, you know what, let's hit escape. I rethought that as we were doing it. I'm going to go to insert edge. I'm going to do it from here. And I'm going to pull this back. And the reason I'm using insert edge is because it'll average the distance between the two edges. So it gets me a nice smooth transition here. And then I want to take this one, because we don't want flat edges anywhere, and just move it in slightly. We could also move it out slightly if we wanted to. It just depends on the shape that you're working on. Now at this point, we need to connect that. We don't want this T point here, which is where we've got a single edge that terminates in the middle of another edge. But I am going to make some slight adjustments. I want to pull this up so it is more horizontal. And then we're going to use insert point. Now, as I mentioned before, we are going through this a little bit quickly, but the process is the same over and over again. It just takes a bit of time. Now, one thing that I'm seeing is now we have a triangle, and the triangles are going to be flat. No matter what we do, by having a 3-sided face like that, we're going to have a flat section, and that's not what I want for this design. So before I even look at the smooth display, I'm going to select it and delete it. And what that does is it now makes this section over here 5-sided. Now, that 5-sided, we can have it in Fusion 360 Forms, but it's not ideal. So what I want to do is I want to build this out so that I have 4 sides on everywhere that touches the opening of the wheel arch. And the way that I need to do that is I need to think about retopologizing. Now, this is a little bit tricky, but it's going to help us get rid of this star point and this star point here. Not really get rid of it, but it's going to help us move it. So I'm going to double click this top edge. We're going to insert edge, and I'm going to just put another edge up here. Now this new edge is going to help us control the shape. So before I do anything else, I'm going to take that from a front view and just pull it down and in. Again, I want to make sure I avoid those flat sections. Now, I don't recommend that you take a look at the smooth display right now. because you're going to have some weird geometry. Things are going to be pulled and stretched. You can see that these edges are pulled and stretched. So it's really important that you get focused on the box display, especially at this stage of your design. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take this other edge and do the same process. I'm going to insert this one here. I'm going to right click and repeat and do the same thing over here, double clicking. And you'll notice that this one is sort of behaving a little funny. And this is the one that has 5 sides on it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say okay, but I'm going to get rid of this edge because I don't really like the way that that's working. And now we're going to use insert point. So insert point, we're going to just come up. The midpoint of that line will be red and we'll connect there. Right click and repeat, and we'll do the same thing over here. Now what this has done is it's sort of moved or added another layer of faces around the wheel arch, but we still have problems because we've got triangles here that we need to address. There's a triangle here, and we still have our star point. So the way in which we can do this is we can either utilize T-points in a design, which in general I avoid, or we can start, again, retopologizing. So an example of that would be for me to get rid of these 2 edges, then use our weld vertices to put these 2 vertices together. We're going to have to sort of find an average location for this, so I'm going to just do some manual work and pull it up and over. And then we will take our insert point and come from that star point down to here and connect those back together. So this gives us 4 sides where it's important around that curvature, and it moves our star point out another sort of level. The same thing can happen over here, and what you're going to find, or what you'll end up noticing, is that a lot of cases it's going to mess up the topology in your design, and you might find yourself adding additional edges just to make the geometry work. So for example here, I might bring this all the way up and break that up so that the star point is here. And then when I use insert point, I can just connect these 2 together. You never want to have a face that has, it's got a bunch of T-points on the side of it, or more than 4 sides that's open around anywhere with curvature that's going to be important to you. And the star points are going to be problematic for curvature, but I do want to make some adjustments. I want to push these in a little bit. Take a look at the rest of the geometry because a lot of this stuff we inserted, so it's going to stay flat. So I want to find these areas and just make some adjustments, pull them in, pull this star point in, and maybe pull these edges in as well, just a little bit. We'll do the same thing on the back side. Pull those in slightly and pull this one in. I always try to work in plane or in a single direction whenever possible, as opposed to moving things around in 3D. So once you get comfortable with doing this at a non-normal angle, so if you're not in your right view or your front view, once you get comfortable moving that around, it can speed the process up a little bit. So now, as we're looking at this, I am going to take a look at this in smooth display and hide my edges, and we can start to identify where some problems are. Now, we're getting to about 24 minutes in this video. I am going to still cut it off at the 30-minute mark, but overall, this doesn't look too bad. But I can already see that this star point, I mean, even with the edges not on, I can tell that's a star point just by the way that the light is changing in that spot. You can see that it's sort of pulling things up and away. And the same thing is happening on the front. You can kind of tell right there as we move things around. It looks pretty good right here, but at that point, it is starting to cause problems. So these are going to be the issues that come up and that have to be fixed when you're working with forms designs like this. There are things that we can do to help. We do have the ability to have T-points and star points in designs if they need to be there. So if they're helpful to the design. One thing that will help this is once we start adding more edges, it'll actually help us control that curvature a bit better. But one thing that we want to make sure we understand at this level is that the star points are going to cause curvature issues in areas where there is a big change in curvature. So I'm going to go ahead and just manipulate this back a little bit. And what I'm doing is I'm trying to get the surfaces around the star point a little bit flatter. The other thing that we can do now that we've pushed those star points out is we can take another edge and we can insert that edge closer to the star point. And again, remember, we want to avoid having ones that are perfectly flat. So anytime we use the simple insertion mode, we want to make sure that we go back and make some adjustments to change that curvature. And now take a look at it in Smooth Display. So as we take a look at this in Smooth Display, let's go ahead and hide the edges so that we can just identify the curvature. When we look at this in Smooth Display, those star points right there and right there are going to be the things that are going to drive us crazy, that are going to take the most amount of time to fix. Everything else looks pretty good. The transition of this lip up here looks pretty good. And down here, it looks okay. Looks okay on the back side. But that is going to be something that is going to drive us crazy. So let's go ahead, bring back our box display. And let's see if we can insert another edge from up top. We're going to go ahead and just put it down here somewhere about in between, like halfway in between, maybe a little bit lower. Things are running a little bit slow right now. Anytime we have a big mesh, even when it's hidden, it does tend to drag things down a little bit. And once again, we don't want it flat, so we do want to make sure that we make a couple of minor adjustments. So I'm going to take this and pull it back in and say okay. We'll take another look at it in Smooth Display. And I think probably the best course of action is for us to try to move the star point out even further. Now, one thing we can do is we can start to explore T-points. So for example, I could get rid of that edge completely and this edge completely by deleting them. And we can try to move or redirect those edges. And so now I'm making a triangle here, and this face now has 5 sides on it. If I repeat the insert point and I do the same thing over here, again, pushing that up, the 5-sided face is not ideal, but in some cases you will find that it does give you a better result than the T-point. And you can see here it is looking a little bit better. And the last thing that we can try to do is we can try to use our utilities and repair body. And anytime we use repair body, if it identifies areas that are red, those are error star points. Well, in this case, they're stars, so they're error star points. These yellow star points can be converted in some cases to T-points, but these ones 100% have to be fixed. And the way that we fix them is we're just going to say auto repair. And what it does is it's going to start moving the geometry away and smoothing those areas out. Now, again, these star points are not ideal because you can see the 3 here because we have a triangular patch and we've got 5 edges going in right there. But once again, once we fix those error stars, we're going to start to get a little bit better result. This is by no means perfect, but we're getting a little bit closer. I'm going to do a couple more edge insertions to round out this video. I'm going to take an edge and put it here, and I'm going to double click on that edge and I'm going to crease it. Now, generally, I don't do this in the designs. I like to avoid putting creased edges in, but for right now, I think it's going to be important for us. And the other thing that I do want to identify before we get too much further is utilities and make uniform. Because we spent so much time on the box display underneath trying to get that box display to be as uniform as possible, using the make uniform is going to take our smooth display and stretch it out and average it so that we're a bit closer to our box display. So I'm going to do Control 4, and it's looking pretty good. It's starting to get there. We don't have a lot of control over the shape yet, but it's starting to get a little bit better. We've got about 30 seconds left, and what I want to do is I'm going to take this upper edge, I'm going to go to Modify Bevel. I'm going to insert 1 at 0.1. I'm going to go back to Smooth Display, Control 4 to hide my edges, and now you can see that I'm driving a harder edge or a crease there. So I'm going to repeat that. I'm going to bring back my box display. This is going to be a bit trickier because we don't want it to go all the way into the wheel arch. The wheel arch is something we still need to fix. It's gotten kind of wonky, for lack of a better term. And we do need to make some adjustments there. I will get back to that. But one thing that we want to do is we want to try to drive these edges a little bit tighter. Now, one thing we can do is we can take this and just do a single edge. I'm going to add that same bevel at 0.1. I'm going to repeat it here. And this is a situation where I think a T-point is actually going to be an okay solution, because then we can drive the curvature at the seam and then we can allow it to blend away. Now, anytime you see an issue like this, oftentimes if you go into utilities and repair body, you can try to fix this. If you try to auto repair it or convert some of these T-points to star points, sometimes that can help with that transition. Another thing that you can do is run make uniform again. Now, make uniform is something you end up running several times, and it will change the way things are going here. Now, you will see that these T-points are kind of all over the map, and what we're going to do is we're going to weld a couple of these vertices back together. So I'm going to take this one and weld it there. I'm going to take this one and weld it there. Then back in smooth display, we're going to go to make uniform one more time. And you can see how it sort of smoothed that out, but it pushed the issue a little bit further. So I'm going to take this edge and just completely delete it, because right now we've just got too many edges in here that we don't need. I'm going to delete that one as well. And Control and 4 to hide the edges. So now we're starting to drive that shape into the corner. We've got a hard crease here, and it disappears at that fender lip. Once we get further in the design, what we're going to end up doing is uncreasing this edge, because we don't need it creased. We're just doing that as a sort of a temporary fix. And we are going to readdress these triangles. And actually, you know what? Let's do it now and get rid of these star points altogether. Because I don't like this geometry, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take these two edges. We're going to insert another edge above. Going to go to insert point, and I want to go from here to here. Right click and repeat, and we're going to come from here to here. And then we'll delete that edge and delete that edge and get rid of those star points for good there. Now we still do have this 5-sided face here and this 5-sided face here. We can work with those a little bit later, but getting rid of those star points is definitely going to be a big benefit to us. Before I finish this off, I do want to run make uniform again. You do end up having to do it multiple times. And I do want to add a crease back here as well. Instead of using bevel, I'm going to use insert edge. And the reason I want to use insert edge here is because now instead of bevel, which will separate those two edges, insert edge will allow me to do it without breaking the merge edge or the edges there. I'm going to leave them flat for now, but let's take a look at this in smooth display. Control 4, make uniform, and just take a look at our results. So not perfect, but we are starting to get there. Now, hopefully this is not too frustrating, but this is the same process that you are going to run into anytime you start to design something with forms. You're going to run into these star points, you're going to run into this geometry in these corners, and it's going to begin to drive you crazy. It's just the nature of the way that these T-splines work. You need to be able to identify these areas and play around with sort of fixing them and working them. I still have to play around and try different ideas. And ultimately, it's just a game or a balance of adding some edges, trying it out, removing them. But right now, I think everything looks pretty good. I'm going to hit A on the keyboard, which is appearances. I'm going to change the mesh body to a white. And I'm going to change the color of this. I'm going to go ahead and go into paint, glossy paint, and I'm going to make it red so it's a little bit easier to see. Actually, it doesn't really highlight the edges very well. Let's try, ooh, it doesn't look good. Let's go back to red. And then let's hop into render, and let's just take a look at the result. I'm going to go into setup. I am going to change the environment to dry lake bed, which is going to be an outside environment. It'll be lots of light, so we'll be able to see the way the sun hits that. And you can kind of follow the reflections. I think this reflection needs to carry on a bit further. We can define that a little bit more. And then the other thing I like to do is try things like skylight or some of these sharp highlights. So we'll try rim highlights. And back here, I'm going to adjust the position, which is going to rotate the light around. We can kind of see the way that the light transitions over the shapes. So everything up front looks pretty good. I like this shape right here. Everything in the back, there's still a pocket right there that really needs to be fixed. You can kind of see that. But overall, I'm really happy with the shape of this design. Now, if I change the color to white and see what it looks like on the car, I think it looks pretty good so far. Obviously, it's still filled in underneath. We still have that one body that is still underneath there, but overall I think it fits the car really well. It lines up with the front edge of that bumper and sort of carries up and matches the car. So I'm going to move back into my design, and I am going to hide that surface, go back into forms, bring back my edges. And this is going to be a good stopping point for us. We covered quite a bit. I ended up going a little bit longer, but I didn't want to leave things where they were. In the next video, we're going to carry on adding some more detail to this. I want to fix this area here, this reflection, and that's going to involve adding some additional edges and control. But before we add those additional edges and control, we need to make sure that everything that's here right now is what we want to see, and we make the adjustments before we add any more edges or vertices. And of course, we're going to have to fix this wheel arch and make some adjustments there. I could certainly get carried away, and I could keep doing this for hours, but I think that we want to make sure that we stop around 30 minutes every time. And this one, again, did go a little bit long. But we do want to make sure we save. You don't want to lose any of your work. And if you want to carry on with this, as I do with all the videos, I will provide this as the starting point for the next video. If you do want to make some adjustments and carry on, I do suggest that you do copy what you have here. So just Control-C, Control-V. So that way you do have one that's sort of frozen in time, and then you can continue to go drastic as well. Now, before the next video, if you want to see something specific, if there is a wide body kit that has a cool feature that you like, or some sort of geometry that you think would look good on this, please leave a comment and let me know. Because again, we're kind of just going through this and walking through the design without a real clear end goal. I don't have a design in mind. So if there's a way that you want to drive this or a feature you want to see, please let me know. And as always, thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next one.